listed in blue.
Water.
Water. Okay? Remember, 35% would still result in 63 liters of urine at this point. I still need to return water to the body. I need to take care of the urea, these nitrogen waste. When I look to my ascending limb, I'm kind of seeing ions again, because not all of the ions moved at the level of the PCT. But the majority of this loop, the goal, get rid of the water. So note, water moves out. Urea moved in. The deeper this loop goes into the medulla, the more of this it will remove. Because the deeper that loop goes into the medulla, the more salty the tissue is. And if it's low in water in the tissue, high in water in the tube, which way do you think the water is going to move? Because water will go from the area of high concentration to low. Okay? And this can, of course, get returned to the body. I still had 35% of stuff, okay? So I still had salts and ions. So as I begin the ascending loop, the one that's going to go up and meet the DCT, the cellular structure will allow for more movement of these ions that I'm going to need with my cells. So the nephron loop, I need to make sure that I get an osmotic gradient, movement of water. Okay, does that make sense? So that I can make sure that what's going to eventually make it to the collecting duct, my water levels are going to be low. Because of that 180 liters, I should get 1 to 2 liters of urine per day. So we're going to find that as we go through the loop, we're still dealing with some of our salts, and we've got some water to deal with. We're going to see that the thick segment, we have active transport that can occur. Note that active transport up there on that ascending limb for ions to move, okay? And sodium, some of the salts, okay, can get to come back into tubular fluid or go back out, all right? And one of the big things is, let's deal with some of this water that's making the way. So, one of the things that will happen in those thick segments, water can't do anything, but look what it can do in the thin. So at this point in time, I'm going to be taking away 15% more of water in the loop. So now, if I had 65 at 100 at the beginning and 65%, I've added another 15%, 65%. I've now taken care of 80% of my water to return it back to the body. Salts are going to be moving, all right? Salts are going to contribute to how salty it is to move that water. So now, as I get through that nephron loop, my next portion of the nephron is my distal convoluted tubule, and then my collecting duct. For my DCT, believe it or not, 20% of water. That's still a lot. 20% of 180 is 36 liters. I still don't want to go to the bathroom for 36 liters. Don't know about y'all. Just me. Okay? But that's still a lot. So, wow. I've only got this little bit, this distal convoluted tubule, and a collecting duct. Well, okay. We're going to be able to take care of that. Because when we look at the DCT, even though still high in salts and water, we can reabsorb the water and the salts, but it's regulated now. When I get to this point, I'm dependent on aldosterone. I will also see that I'll become dependent on anti-diuretic hormone if needed. Aldosterone, look what it's secreted by. The adrenal glands. Where do they sit? On top of the kidneys. Kidneys need the adrenal glands need the kidneys, but they're actually separate from each other. So, aldosterone is termed the salt-retaining hormone. Now,
Isn't testosterone a type of aldosterone, or are they connected?
They're going to be separated, and with the aldosterone, I'd have to go back and look it up based on its relationship to those secondary sex characteristics, because it only plays a small portion, but I think it plays the portion of making sure that, is it like deepening of the, anyway, I can't remember exactly which secondary sex characteristics it shows up with, but I do know it does, so I'll look it up at break.
Okay.
Focus on that testosterone, because, you know, like, oh, you know, testosterone, women, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
The biggest thing for aldosterone, salt retaining. Because at the point of the DCT and the CD, okay, I still have a huge amount of my salts, which I kind of need to get back to the body. So therefore, salt retaining. So the aldosterone, which gets secreted, okay, when either the blood sodium drops. So if sodium levels in the blood dropped, what would we want to do with the sodium making its way through the nephron? If sodium was dropping in the blood level, what do I want to do? Keep it or continue to let it go? I want to keep it. And then if potassium rises, what would it do to the potassium in that filtrate? Would it keep it or let it continue? Let it continue. Blood pressure can affect this. This is why blood pressure is going to be such a huge issue once you get into the medical field, okay? And also renin production, meaning the renin that the kidneys produce for the blood cells and keeping up, okay? So aldosterone, what it's going to act upon, when you look at this ascending limb, a huge portion of it was the thick segment. So aldosterone can act on this thick segment of the distal convoluted tubule, and then on my cortical portion of the collecting duct, the portion that's near the cortex. So what it'll do is it'll stimulate these areas to either reabsorb sodium or secrete potassium because that happens and materials can follow each other. Water and chlorine will follow the sodium. Meaning, if we need to keep the sodium, we're going to keep those. If we need to get rid of it, it's going to get rid of it. Urine volume will get reduced in times when potassium gets elevated in the body because water, this urine volume, if we're going to have it follow potassium, I don't need all of my water going out of my body because that's going to dehydrate. And that's why we might need anti-diuretic hormone. Because like the name implies, anti-diuretic, it is not going to let the water leave the body. So, this is, of course, if you guys remember, the posterior pituitary. It stays there, it kind of gets produced, it gets stored because we don't need it all the time. We only need it sometimes, okay? So, if we were to see too much water leaving the body and dehydration setting in, dehydration ends up creating this whole series of events that'll take place in the body. That means I'm going to have my blood volume get reduced. That means blood gets thicker. Blood gets thicker. We're going to have a hard time moving it through the heart, through the vessels, getting it to the tissues. So I can't have that. So if that becomes the case, anti-diuretic hormone would kick in and say, no, 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 do not go urinate. Stay behind and help build up the blood volume. If we begin to see a rise in blood osmolarity, a buildup of the substances that would not have, in other words, the water level would not be high enough in the blood. So anti-diuretic would say, no, do not let the water pass, turn the water back to the body and build up this blood volume. We need the water. That's what anti-diuretic hormone does. Other hormones that can play a part in urine production. Our heart secretes a hormone in times when blood pressure is high. Now, this happens all the time. You start an exercise or anything like that, your blood pressure is going to go up, okay? So this can be done under natural conditions, but other times it can be chronic, be an issue. And natriuretic peptides are what the heart cells can release. What they're going to do, they're going to help the system excrete more of the salt and water so that the blood pressure will hopefully go down, blood volume not be as high, and not create such an issue on the heart. Okay? Like I said, can happen naturally, body handles it, but at times it can become chronic, and that's when people have to start blood pressure medicine and all that sort of stuff. Now, the parathyroid hormone. You guys remember, one of the things about the parathyroid hormone, it dealt with calcium. This is why the kidneys are important with calcium, which means it's going to affect nervous, it's going to affect muscular, it's going to affect bone. Okay, it's going to have this huge effect over so many systems because calcium is so regulated in the body. It is going to keep those calcium levels so tight, okay, that we are either hopefully going to see the calcium being utilized properly and everything functioning good. If it goes down, it'll want to pull it from the bone. So, This is why calcium is important, okay? And it can